Welcome, dear viewer, to this video about an ecosystem that has not received any light for a year and a half. Before we take a look at what's currently happening in this jar and all the life that experienced darkness for so long, let's take a look at how this ecosystem has changed over this period of time from the very start. It all started with taking a bit of existing ecosystem and putting it in a jar. Unlike usually when making an ecosystem, I didn't add any plants, as those would quickly die anyway. Because there's no plants in here and any algae would quickly die due to the lack of light, this would remain an open ecosystem so that the animals still have a source of oxygen. Alright, this is what it looked like at the very start. Let's see what was living in it. Here we have a mysterious worm. At the time I had never seen it before and I still haven't seen it anywhere else. I tried to identify it but wasn't able to do so. I'm quite sure it belongs to the Oligochaeta. Last time I said it just might be in the order of Lumbriculida, but I'm starting to doubt that. I think it's more likely in the order of Tubifacida, though again I'm not sure. Since then, viewers suggested it might be a Branchiodrilus or a Branchiura, but I'm not convinced. These worms seem to have a much smaller head. Someone else suggested it to be a wishy-washy, wacky, wiggling, aquatic, acrobat, tentacle, tubular tubifax worm. Now, I don't know about the tubifax part, but apart from that, I think it's absolutely correct. Anyway, they're worms. That's what most of you care about anyway. Also present were gammarids, or scuds, some carrying eggs. There was a chironomid midge larva and bladder snails, Visa fontinales. Another snail species were the cute little limpets. And there were Daphnia and copperpods present. That's what we can see with the naked eye, but of course there is more. Looking much more closely, we saw a lot of these tiny microbes, as well as some ciliates. Representing the phytoplankton were the diatoms, like this really big one. Even though it might look like a tiny animal crawling around, it is actually an algae. Out of all these organisms, the ones that are omnivores or even detridivores, like the scuds, bladder snails, limpets, ciliates and probably also the mystery worms, will likely do just fine in a dark ecosystem, as they are often found in similar conditions in nature. On the other hand, organisms that are either photosynthetic, like the diatoms, and those that feed on photosynthetic organisms, like Daphnia and to some extent copperpods, will probably have a hard time. Time for darkness. A week of darkness, to be exact. After a week it didn't look that different, but there were a lot of bubbles, indicating gas formation by anaerobic bacteria and therefore very little oxygen in the sediment. After a week, the bladder snails were doing just fine. So fine, in fact, that they laid eggs. It's the slimy substance next to this scud, which does not carry eggs anymore. They actually hatched and the entire jar is now filled with baby gammarids. Cute! This Daphnia is also full of eggs, and the same is true for some copperpods. It seems like this has proven to be a very fertile week. I'm not sure if there are more limpets, but there are many. Of course, we also still have the worms, not currently waving in the water, but settling in the sediment. On the microscopic scale, we can still see many diatoms. They've been able to survive a week of darkness. I haven't been able to find that really big one anymore though, unfortunately. There were also quite a lot of these smaller, fast-moving ciliates, but again, I couldn't find the bigger species from a week earlier. So, 1 week of darkness. Time to top off the water and put it back in its grim state. The events that transpired up until this point are no news to those that watched the previous video about this ecosystem. But whatever happened in the 1.5 years since then? Let's have a look. Half a year later it looked like this. It had lost a lot of water due to evaporation, and it seemed that almost all the plant material had been processed by the detritivores, and now formed a layer of pulp on top of the existing sediment, which was already quite pulpy. So this is what it looks like after half a year of darkness. Quite a dramatic change. There is still some plant matter left, but that jungly look is now mostly gone. Apparently there was a bit of metal in the sediment I collected. Oh well, I guess that's only representative of our polluted environment. There was another gas bubble, meaning the sediment is still anaerobic. It would be really strange if it wasn't anymore, actually. You probably already saw them zooming around. The gammarids are still here. The species present in this jar is most likely Gammaris pulex. They are one of the most abundant species in Europe, including in the Netherlands, although in quite some places they are locally completely outcompeted by Ponto-Caspian invaders like Dicrogammaris villosus and Dicrogammaris hemobaphes, which have been able to spread across much of Europe due to canalization and the increasing connectedness of European waterways. That's a bit off topic, I guess, but it was part of my bachelor's thesis, and sometimes I just need to show off a bit with the knowledge I gained. Otherwise it's just sitting in my head, doing nothing. Oh look, a bladder snail. Whew, saved by the bell. Or by the snail. Shut up! I'm fine. Alright, the bladder snail. Another detritivore that's tough to kill. Phisa fontinalis, like I said earlier. Or is it? You see, I've been calling this snail Phisa fontinalis for years. But snails are often named non-scientifically after physical attributes. As it turns out, there's more than one species of snail that breathes air. Well, that might not be shocking to some of you, but breathing snails apparently do not invoke a great deal of creativity in their namers, as there are actually two different species referred to as bladder snail. This was pointed out by, alright, none of my viewers. Step up your game, guys. No, just kidding. You guys are perfect and I love you very much. Mwah. So, there is Phisa fontinalis, known as the common bladder snail, and then there is Physella acuta, known as the bladder snail, acute bladder snail, tadpole snail, for some reason, and European Phisa. Bit boring if you ask me, but okay. According to some sources, the easiest way to tell them apart is that Physella acuta has a more acute or pointy end of its shell than Phisa fontinalis. Personally, I don't find that the best way to tell them apart. Like we can read in this lovely little booklet, if you can read Dutch at least, the shells of Phisa fontinalis are much thinner and shinier than those of Physella acuta. The finger-like extensions of the mantle, which help with breathing, extend to both sides of the shell in Phisa fontinalis and only on the right side in Physella acuta. This leads me to believe that most snails in this jar are actually the acute bladder snails, Physella acuta. Some snails might be Phisa fontinalis though, like this individual that's currently not showing its mantle. That's not to say that I misidentified them every time, but in the future I will be more careful in making the distinction. Thanks for pointing that out. Me. Did you know that there might actually be more conspecific species of Phisa fontinalis, especially in North America? No, enough about snail taxonomy already. Let's move on to another inhabitant. You might have already seen one scooting around. There's still copepods in this ecosystem. No Daphnia though, but I think that might be due to them depending more on microscopic algae as a source of food than copepods. Although phytoplankton is also part of the diet of copepods. I guess I don't actually really know. Time to add some water again. Now I hear you thinking, whatever happened to those worms? Don't worry, they're still here. Again, not in the water column. They seem to prefer burrowing. I'm not really sure how many there are, but at least a couple, and their burrowing resulted in an intricate grid of tunnels in the sediment. Pretty cool. I wonder if this network extends throughout the sediment in the entire jar. It's only visible against the glass, of course, but I don't see any reason why the worms would only want to dig next to the glass, especially since it is usually all dark anyway. Maybe up until this point I've been lucky to see them every time. It's pretty cool, right? All the little things that can happen in a small jar, it makes for good stories. It looks like all the animals, and especially the snails, have actually gotten darker than usual. But maybe I'm just imagining things. Going forward another 8 months and it looked like this. I had kind of forgotten a bit about it. You know, out of sight, out of mind. That's also the reason I haven't filmed it very regularly. On this specific day I didn't really have any time to film it, unfortunately, but I filled it with water and put it away again. Luckily it wasn't completely desiccated, but all the water above the sediment had evaporated. Sorry little water guys. Another month and a half later I took a proper look at it. At first glance it didn't look like much was happening anymore. I accidentally added another stressor for the organisms in this ecosystem. Not just darkness, but also drought. Luckily I was quickly greeted by a snail and all was well. These snails really seem to be getting a lot darker, which I think is probably some form of acclimatization to the dark environment, though I'm not entirely sure what the advantage of that would be. By now we know that bladder snails, whether they are common or acute, are quite indestructible, so it should be no surprise that they would survive drought and darkness. And even though they eat algae, they can also consume detritus, dead and decaying organic matter, which there is plenty of. Though this does raise questions about the longevity of this ecosystem. Without light, there is no primary production, and without primary production there is no influx of new food and energy. Of course, there are many places in nature that are permanently dark, like most of the seafloor, but also the bottoms of many freshwater systems and even underground rivers and sewers. But they are always below or otherwise connected to bodies of water that do receive light. Now this jar might do well for quite some time. There's not that many animals in there, but not indefinitely, I don't think. This brings me to an interesting point. As some of you might know, I am colorblind, but it does look to me like there is some greenish growth on the glass here. This is curious. It implies algae growth, and that should not be possible, not without light for so long. There's some algae species that can grow in very low light conditions, but surely not in complete darkness. This leopard pattern looks like grazing tracks from the snails, so they are eating it. There is some sort of growth on the entire glass surface, some kind of biofilm. Interesting to note is that the green growth, or orange or brown, whatever it is, which must be some sort of bacterial or other microbial growth, is growing right next to this bit of decaying matter, I think an old leaf. Maybe the concentration of nutrients is higher there. However, right next to it is another, different decaying leaf. The glass right behind this leaf is the only glass in the jar without any growth. Maybe the decaying process releases some kind of mild toxin, or it's the favorite playing spot of the snails and scuds and that's why they graze all this biofilm? I really don't know. Wow, what's with all the questions, guys? Stop asking so much! No, just kidding. Never stop asking questions. It's important. And it's fun. I think I'm losing my mind, guys. No, I'm fine. I'm fine. Yep, you heard that right. The scuds are also still present. Like the snails in this ecosystem, gammarids are pretty indestructible. Especially if, like the snails, they lack any predators. But the scuds don't lack any predators in this jar. They are predated on by themselves. That's right. You're looking at cute little cannibals. But they also eat decaying matter and can't really take on someone their own size. And the young ones are good at hiding, so they'll probably do fine. What about the other inhabitants? Let's start with the limpets. Spoiler alert, they're gone. Initially I thought they would do well, just like the bladder snails, because I made the ignorant and foolish assumption that snails are snails. I know you guys all think that I am so smart and knowledgeable and omniscient and perfect and also very handsome, but that's not all true. I too mistakes make. Without going into too much detail about all the inhabitants of this jar, because the video is getting quite long already, The limpets in here are either Acroloxus lacustris or Ferrissia fragilis. They are really hard to tell apart, which actually resulted in the latter only being discovered in the Netherlands in the mid-70s. Not because it was newly introduced, but because they were simply never noticed as a separate species. The story of the taxonomy of this species is actually quite complicated and interesting, but I'm already going into way too much detail, so I'll add some sources in the description for further reading for those that are interested. Anyway, out of the two species, I hope it's the latter, partly because of its common name. I don't believe it has a common name in English, but in Dutch it's called smurfslak, which translates to smurf snail. Isn't that funny? But mostly because that's the species I could actually find some information on about diet. For now, I'll assume they have a similar diet though. As it turns out, these smurf snails mostly eat diatoms, specifically diatoms that grow on plants. Now you can see why that would be a bit of a problem. There never were any plants in here, and I doubt there's a significant number of diatoms of any kind left. Alright, now it's really time to move on from our limpets. The Daphnia and copepods are gone as well. As discussed earlier, they eat mostly unicellular algae and other microorganisms floating in the water. The lack of algae would add a stressful factor, potentially leading to their extinction. But there's another factor, the presence of the predatory gammarids. The small crustaceans probably succumbed to the combination of these two stressors. Then there's our mystery worms. I haven't seen them in several months. They could be gone, but they also could be buried in the sediment. I only look at this jar for a very short time every few months, so I might have just missed it. Oh right, the mosquito and midge larvae. They probably turned into adults and flew away. A month later I took it out again, because I realized that I hadn't actually looked at the microbial community, and I'm sure our little friend would be disappointed if we didn't take a look under the microscope. Wow, look at this big guy. Just like previously, I'll grab a sample from the sediment-water interface, nerd, so we can, take a bit of a closer look. This thing is the empty frustule of a dead diatom. I looked around for quite a bit and unsurprisingly I did not see a single living diatom, which also explains the limpet's demise. All the tiny black things you can see zooming around in all the microscope shots are bacteria or archaea. Here's a thing that moves. Looks like a bacterial colony maybe. Here's a star-shaped moving object. Weird. Here's a more exciting microbe for most, a paramecium. The first time we looked at the microbes, we saw different ciliates. This paramecium is proof that the ciliates are still here. It's no surprise that paramecium are doing well here, because they are bacteriovores. And as we can see, there's plenty of bacteria to eat. Wow, what a ride! The ecosystem living in complete darkness for 1.5 years. It has been interesting to see the development of the ecosystem without any light. Of course, compared to most of my projects, it is not airtight. A closed jar in darkness would quickly be oxygen deprived. This ecosystem has survived for quite some time by now, but like I argued earlier, I think it has a limited lifespan due to a lack of influx of new food and energy, because there's no light and no primary producers. It would be interesting to see how long this ecosystem will last in complete darkness, but it might also be interesting to see how it'll react to suddenly being exposed to a structural day and night cycle. Let me know what you think about those options. Well, that's all I have to say for now. Thanks for listening to me rambling on about taxonomy and a whole bunch of other stuff. I hope it was bearable. For now, I will leave you with one last clip of a very entertaining microbe. It seems to be a ciliate that likes to swim in circles and then jump around a lot. There are quite a lot of them in this sample. If you happen to know what they are, please do tell us. Goodbye. Whoa! 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 Oh. 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 That's really strange.